Now the YouTube one started. The YouTube is actually streaming. Right, it is. And we hit this button. Hello, and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about Fast and Furious Part 6, because we've got a lot of these movies to get through. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you focus on what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, on this podcast, we are just Fast and Furious pilled, I guess. Like, that's all we're doing right now. We're doing Fast and Furious stuff. Yeah, so,
Would
I
it
don't know,
be
today's...
Can we make Faced and Furious pilled work?
Yeah, like based in Red Pill. Fast and Furious Pill. Yeah. So this, I guess I wanna open this by saying this is the meat. This is the meat and potatoes. Okay, we're past all of the setup, getting everything in position. Right. Fast Five gets the crew together. Now they're together, and we're just cooking with gas. Okay, like.
So, Buddy, I'm gonna sit here and you told me that 5 is the one that everyone loves.
Yes.
Buddy, this may be the best dumb movie that I have ever seen.
Yes! Honestly, there is so much just unbridled joy on screen. This is one of the things that I think translates. I don't want to talk about spoilers, but they loved shooting this movie. You can tell they were like, I cannot wait to do this thing, and it's gonna be this sort of like, it's very like himbo energy. You know what I mean? Golden Retriever energy. Just like sweet and dumb, but just trying its best. You know what I mean? Like, that's all. They just want to have fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, every once in a while, I'd be like, this doesn't make any sense. And I remember, I'm watching Fast and Furious. I need to stop thinking about that. And just, like, let it happen. Because, like, I love this movie in the same way, honestly, that I kind of love, like fucking, like The Room, right? Like,
Wow.
Maybe,
okay.
Maybe not quite that bad, but, like, this movie is just, like, dumb, stupid, fun, and I love it, right? Like, people told me that, like, these movies eventually turn into superhero movies. This is the first movie where I felt that was really true, right? Like, if I'm going to
absolutely.
put the reason why I like this better than 5, I think that 5 was still trying to be too grounded, right? Like, 6... right? Like, imagine how stupid that is.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, somebody once described the Fast and Furious series as Axe Body Spray's Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
Which feels kind of correct, but I actually think that maybe at this point I would say it is Axe Body Spray's The Avengers, right? Because like the meme is they go from stealing DVD players in Los Angeles, right, to fighting international terrorists. There's a jump between Fast Five. In Fast Five, they steal $100 million from a Brazilian crime lord. Okay,
Right.
So at the end of the day, that is not super realistic. We would all agree that's not super realistic. They are still executing, stunts with cars. Their superpower is driving cars, right? But this is the thing that makes the jump from we're stealing stuff to we're fighting international criminals, right? Like, we're saving the known world, right? And you know why we're doing it, Mango?
Why is that?
For family.
Yeah, I mean, this is also the movie where they suddenly start caring about civilians, right? Like,
I mean, you just kind of have to, because we have to get to the spoiler section. Because I can't wait to talk about this scene. Anyway,
you know what?
I'm
gonna put the spoilers warning right here, because this movie is so fucking unbelievable that, like, you should watch it without being spoiled, right?
That is true. That's true. I think I agree with you.
You will keep watching it and you will keep being like, what the fuck is happening? Right?
Yeah, because there are certain reveals that just, like, crop up and you're just like, oh my god, that doesn't make any sense, but I get it. right? Anyway, we'll talk about
Yeah.
spoiler stuff. But before we get there,
Okay.
because I want to encourage people to get off of the podcast and come back later after they have watched Fast and Furious 6. Where does this rank? Is this above Tokyo Drift
Oh
because
man,
of its intense stupidity?
I kind of want to watch Tokyo Drift again, right? Like it's like right now the Mango Machete order for the Fast and Furious films is 6, then 3, right? Because you get like I sent you this while I was watching. It's like they recap the first 5 movies in like the opening of or the
Mhm.
you know 1, 2, 4, and 5 in the beginning of this, right? And then 3 chronologically happens after this movie, right? So like like and that's like semi-facetious, but like this is definitely like it's this one and Tokyo Drift are like the top of my pile, definitely. I don't know if one overcomes the other. Like if I want to watch a racing movie, it's probably Tokyo Drift. If I want to watch like a fun action movie, right, I'm watching this movie instead.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, this one I think. Uh, so Fast Five is my number one, and it kind of and has been for a long time. I liked Too Fast Too Furious also. A little bit. I think those are probably different than yours. But I think my list is probably like 5, 3, 2, 1, 4. Right. I think we both agree that 4 is the worst. Um, I think I like it more than Tokyo Drift. You kind
That's
of
fair.
have to in a way because this is just this is the good stuff. This is like when it gets really sweet. But I do really love Tokyo Drift, and I think Tokyo Drift deserves to be at like closer to the top of the list. So that's probably where we're
Yeah,
at the moment. No, second under Fast Five. I like Fast Five better, but
yeah.
that's where we're at.
I think the problem here is like, yes, it's like I think it's kind of like putting like Ang Lee's Hulk in like the Marvel canon, right? Like, yes, it is technically part of the cinematic universe, but it
Sure.
really kind of stands alone for the most part, right? For Tokyo Drift. So I think it's a little bit harder to judge against the rest of them. Whereas like 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 are all clearly part of the same continuum.
Yeah.
Three is something that's just a little bit different. But yeah. All
Okay.
right.
So this is spoilers. This is spoilers. Okay. So the thing that I want to talk about so bad is the fucking tank because it's so great. I forgot how great it was. I remember having this feeling. Actually, I didn't forget. I just sort of forgot the feeling that I had the first time. I remember really thinking the tank scene was sweet, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate why until I watched it again. And it's 2 reasons. One, it comes out of fucking nowhere, right? They You think that they're stealing, like, they're attacking the convoy, they're after this little computer chip or whatever, right? And then the tank literally drives out of the truck, crushes it, and then just starts crushing cars on this highway in Spain. And every time it does, it's orgasmic. It's just so satisfying to watch these cars like run into it and just go right, like right underneath, right? But all the other stuff that happens, where they're actually driving around on this highway and trying to take down the tank, and Roman gets in front of it. He dangles the cable over the turret, and that's what they use in order to like stop the whole thing. All of that, I think, is also just like a really well done, like really top end action scene. And outside of the safe stuff from 5, which is still the number one action scene in my opinion, is them running around the streets of Rio with the safe, using it to smash into cars. Them fighting a tank is pretty fucking sweet. And did you couldn't have known that this was happening, right? Like you didn't expect that, right?
No, so I was saying like, I had to like turn my like I did not know this was happening. Like the things that flash through my head as I see this tank driving out is, why are they transporting the chip in a tank? Why is the tank being transported with live ammunition? Right? Why is any of this? And it's like, wait, I have to turn my brain off, right?
Yep.
Like, and it's just like, why is he shooting the bridge with civilians? Why do they suddenly care about people, right? Like, why did no one call Hobbs, right? Like they figure out what's happening, and Hobbs finds out because of a report back from the track, not because like someone called him up and was like they're gonna hit the convoy, right? Which is like, would like brain off, right? Like, culminating in fucking Vin Diesel like getting launched across a bridge and catching Letty and like landing on the car and them not like, it's like, what the fuck is
Yeah,
happening?
because famously, when people when people jump out of cars that are going 80 miles an hour, when they stop on the hood of another car, they're just fine. He just
Yeah,
walks that off.
and not only that, but it gets played like it's totally real. Letty says, "How did you know there was going to be a car to break our fall?" It's like, why does that matter?
This is the greatest shit. This is the greatest shit. It's like Shakespeare. It's so serious, and it has nothing to do with the logic. It is just all about, he's like, I did it, right? Like with that super deep voice. And it is all about the fact that he was willing to die
Yeah,
for Letty. Oh, because he loves her so much. And I think that's part of what it is. This is something that has come out in stark relief, especially compared to Quantumania. Because I've been reading a lot of Marvel discourse. Quantumania is, like not putting up numbers for box office stuff. People are saying that it's not quite a bomb, but it is indicative that like this is like real Marvel fatigue, right? People are not showing
yeah,
up for these movies, and all this other sort of stuff. And I was thinking about how you can just really paper over so much by just having that moment with like Dom and Letty, right? Like it doesn't none of the rest of it matters. It doesn't fucking matter that they should both be toothpaste, right? On the side of a highway, right? The thing that matters is that he loves her, right? And that achingly sincere, super, super earnest emotionality at the core, which is at the core of all of this, right? You know, um, I think is what makes Fast and Furious special in a way that Marvel does not feel special, right? In a certain sense, I guess I'm making an argument that Marvel has sort of irony poisoned itself a little. That where even though I think I would probably say a lot of these Marvel movies have better sort of plots that make more sense, all this other sort of stuff. When they lack that sincerity, right? It does kind of take the heart out of the whole thing, which is not something I necessarily want to level at Quantumania itself too hard, but I do think it underlies a lot of the problems that we've talked about in like this phase 4, phase 5 kind of era, right? Like Thor Love and Thunder is this. You don't believe the sincerity of Jane and Thor's love for each other. That's not there's no chemistry there. You don't think that he cares about her, and the whole movie sort of falls apart, right? This is a movie predicated on the idea that absolutely, like Dom is willing to go up against an international terrorist just so he can rescue this woman who is the love of his life, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
yeah. No, I mean, and like, I honestly think that like there's something there that like, how do I want to put this? Like, the ridiculousness makes the love more real in a way, right? Like the fact that it is so absurd, I think drives it home in a way, right? In a way that I think that's kind of why, the Marvel movies kind of don't get there, because like superhero movies, you have an excuse to be like fairly ridiculous, and like um Marvel takes the opportunity to crack jokes, which was good for like a while, but like it's kind of wearing thin now. Um, I feel like if we had as many Fast and Furious movies as we had Marvel movies, we'd be having a similar problem. But like, you know, Dom, like I think the fact that Dom is willing to jump off of a car to save Letty, like a speeding car across the bridge and catch her on another car, sells that he loves her. The fact that Hobbs is willing to pull out a gun and hold a fucking officer at gunpoint to let the terrorists steal the chip because love is that important, right? Like, sells the theme of the movie so fucking hard, right? Like, it makes no sense. I was like screaming at the television. I was literally screaming at the television while this was happening, but it sells it, right? Like,
he's part of the crew. He's part of the family now, Mango. Right?
yeah,
Like
no,
this is the thing that. And by the way, this is the first long line of instances where the bad guy from the previous movie gets absorbed into the movie. Obviously, Hobbs is sort of a middling bad guy.
Yeah,
He is not quite the bad guy, right?
right.
But he does get absorbed into the Fast and Furious crew, which I am very excited about because it sets the stage for future incarnations of that very thing happening, which it's so good. Anyway, yeah, it's funny to me also. The main reason why I think this one is worse than Fast Five, um, mostly has to deal with the sort of plot cul-de-sac nature of some of this stuff. The team is together for kind of the end, like the big sort of action scenes towards the end of the movie. Basically everything's starting at the tank and kind of going from there. Um, but the stuff before that I do think is a little bit rockier. And there are some sort of asides that I don't love. In particular, Brian goes back to the United States and hangs out with Shea Wiggum, his FBI buddy, and gets admitted to a federal prison to talk to Braga, the bad guy from the fourth movie, in order to get like Shaw's backstory and connect the dots between how Shaw and like Letty did stuff or whatever. And there is some stuff there, and I do feel for Brian's like, this is my fault, right? Like I'm the one who put you in this position kind of thing. But I really just felt like, boy, all of that, you could have just told me. You could have just had a fucking Skype call and I would have been fine, right? Like if Brian was like, I know a guy, and he calls up his friend in the FBI, and he goes like, yeah, I talked to Braga about, you know, Shaw, and this is what he said. Like you could have done all of that and kind of kept the main group a little bit more together, which I think would have sort of helped things it would have sort of helped things along.
I think I kind of agree with that. My biggest problem with that bit was that it felt like it was redundant because basically Dom gets the same information directly from Shaw in like the scene where he's like racing with Letty and like Shaw
Yep.
comes out from under the bridge. Like that information, like the information that O'Connor gets that's kind of unique is just like not a lot.
Yep.
And I felt that was not great. Like I don't think it worked super well. I also felt that like you're starting to see like other members of the crew start to get flanderized. Like Roman feels like he's very flanderized in this movie.
Oh, it's gonna get worse from here, buddy.
Okay.
I
I mean,
gotta
and
tell you.
but I think that's kind of the nature of like side characters, right? Like I only kind of expect Dom and O'Connor to be the real characters kind of in general, right? Like cuz like you said last time, like Hobbs is kind of like a walking one-liner. Ludacris is now the tech guy, right?
Oh yeah.
The only who else? Well, Han's dead. Giselle. We didn't actually see Giselle's corpse, so I'm putting it at like 80% that she's not dead. I'm not sure.
Whoa.
I mean, just because like they pulled the shit with Letty, right?
Mhm.
Like unless you like see their corpse, I just kind of like this is kind of like this movie is stupid. Like this series is stupid enough to bring her back somehow, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I do like this might actually be my favorite movie for sort of like Giselle and Han, because you like they're doing the thing, and it's tropey, but like it works. They're doing the thing of like one last job. I'm 3 days from retirement or
yeah.
whatever. But like it's like, oh, Giselle's not in Tokyo with him, and he goes back to essentially drug dealing or whatever when he in the Tokyo Drift sort of days. And so something bad is happening, and they're just like setting you up for that moment. And then when it comes, it is simultaneously fucking insane, right? Because she does this thing where she like falls off the back of the car, draws a pistol, and shoots the guy as she's like falling into the darkness behind her, and she just sort of like disappears into that or whatever. But it's just like, it's the kind of thing that's like, why didn't she just pull out the gun in the first place? Like you would have thought that like they're doing all this hand-to-hand stuff on the plane or whatever, it's like, wouldn't you just want to pull out the pistol and shoot the guy, right? Like instead of like actually fighting or whatever. And it's just like that moment again works because of the sincerity, because I'm
Yeah.
invested in Han and Giselle as a couple, weirdly more invested than a lot of other couples in a lot of other movies. I have no idea why, but I do believe that these two kind of care
Honestly,
for each other.
more than the two mainline couples, right? Like I buy that Dom loves Letty and I buy that Brian loves Mia, but like
Yeah.
Han and Giselle are the couple that is like actually on screen together, right? Like,
Yeah.
um,
And also like supporting one another in a way that
yeah,
is like I feel like that has like couple energy. You know what
yes,
I mean?
yeah,
Like when they go to the thing, and there's four of them. It's Hobbs picks up. I can't even remember the actress's name. She's the one who got super canceled.
Oh, Gia
Um,
Carino,
Gia Carino, right?
It-
This is, by the way, like her big break.
right?
Is this, and then goes into stuff like Deadpool and The Mandalorian. Anyway, so she's with Han and Roman, and Giselle just sort of takes the lead on this thing, and Han is totally fine with it, and Roman is like wisecracking or whatever. But like you actually do feel this tension and this thing where it's just like, yeah, he trusts her that she's going to get it done, and he's going to have her back, and he does, right? Like when shit hits the fan or whatever. And I feel like that stuff communicates the couple energy better than Mia being off screen, Dom and Letty kind of, I guess, like flirt racing. It was funny. I had forgotten about that street race. But yeah.
Yeah, it's Gina Carano is the full name,
Okay.
not Gia Carino. But yes, no, I noticed that it like in the in like the credits, it was like, oh, that's that person, right? Like I thought I recognized her, right? Like, but yeah, no, yeah, just like Giselle's just like their romance is like very real.
Yeah.
Like like that is like I feel like that's like just like the like true love, right? Like conquers all, right? I feel like that's just like the theme, right? Like of the series, and like true love, and not necessarily in the romantic way, like in the family way too. Like it works, right?
Yeah.
Also, like this movie shows us a harpoon gun, right? I'm like, oh, this is gonna get used once, right? The whole ending scene is like harpoon. He's like,
My favorite thing about the harpoon gun scene is this is the kind of dumb that we're dealing with, but it's like, who cares? There's one moment where one character is in a car and says, if I can shoot that flap with this harpoon gun, right, we can bring down the plane. Okay, clearly sets up what they're trying to do. That person misses, right? Then another person,
but they don't
pulls
miss
out
the
a har-
plane. They hit the wing.
yeah, but they miss the flap.
Right,
They're
right,
aiming for
yes.
the flap so that they can pull the flap and force the plane to not take off. Then another person shows up with another harpoon gun in a car. They don't say anything, but they also shoot at the flap, right?
And miss.
And then in the third one, and then that one misses. And then a third person shows up. None of these people have communicated this plan to each other, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, the movie told you that the flap was important, and it isn't bothering to tell you that these people are communicating in some way. I guess they're all just intuiting that they can they can bring down the plane by shooting it in the flap, because the person who eventually does it, and does it in a particularly cool way, by the way. Not that this really paid off anything, but I just like the moment where he aims, and then he like kind of squints a little, and he's like, oh yeah, and then he like aims way forward because the power of the engine is going to suck the spear back, and it does in fact suck the spear back into the flap. Like that's like cool. Even if the first two times it didn't really seem like that was set up by the harpoon stuff. And then maybe the best use of a harpoon gun, which is Letty and Gia Carano having their take two of their fist fight, and Letty pulls the spear gun out of the plane, but these are specifically spear guns that Tej engineered and included in the Fast and Furious cars. So where did she get that spear gun? And she shoots Gia Carano and she goes flying out of the plane. And it's just like, you can't think about it. You just can't fucking think about it, or you will ruin your own day.
Yeah, no, I mean like that whole plane scene, right? Because they're fighting, and Vin Diesel leaps and headbutts this like discount fucking even Drago, right? And like this like
Yeah,
so
we haven't even talked about this because they're all evil doppelgangers.
right. Like and I was like, oh, it's a thing, and then they call it out. He says it's like Roman looks it's like this evil doppelganger.
And they go through and they tell you who each of the doppelgangers are a doppelganger for because they're all like racially aligned, or like, you know, then there's obviously the guy who is the doppelganger for Hobbs is this huge like muscular, you know, like
discount
dude
even
or
Drago,
whatever.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, oh my god. Yeah, it's so satisfying. And then they're fighting and you can tell that they're like mismatched. Like Brian is getting absolutely owned because Brian's doppelganger is the girl, right? Who he owns, by the way. I think okay, oh man, I want to talk about that. I'm just gonna put a pin in this. We'll talk about that later. So his doppelganger is the girl. Shaw's doppelganger is
Dom.
Dom, yeah. The muscle guy is Hobbs, right? Okay. So when they go in, it is Vin Diesel and Shaw are like going at it, but Brian is matched up against the muscle guy, and he's just getting. Oh no, I'm saying Brian is fighting Shaw, and Vin Diesel's fighting the muscle guy. Right.
And it switches a couple times, but I think you're right? Like Brian is primarily fighting. But
then Hobbs shows up, and then Hobbs and Vin Diesel, Hobbs and Dom double team the huge muscle guy, including a bit where I think Dom holds up his legs or whatever so that like the Rock can do like a flying jump punch.
Yeah, you can literally do a wrestler move, right? Like
yeah. I have to say, I don't know if you know much about this. There's a huge feud between The Rock and Vin Diesel about the Fast and Furious franchise.
Really?
Famous. So behind the scenes, famously, what happened is, you know, The Rock kind of pops off in 5 and in 6 and kind of graduates to kind of co-lead of the movie, right? He starts becoming the world's biggest action star, movie star, all of this other sort of stuff. And he's sort of famous. He did this with Black Adam also. He's sort of famous for kind of wanting to sort of exert producer level control over the films and franchises that he's a part of, right? And Vin Diesel got really pissy about that because he's like, buddy, we did, you know, 4 of these movies before you stepped in the fucking door, right? These are my movies that I care about. You can't like kind of like push me around. And it, you know, that boils under the scene starting in this one, but we'll go through, you know, 7 and 8 until The Rock kind of gets shunted off into the Hobbs and Shaw, you know, group of movies. And Hobbs doesn't show up in the mainline Fast and Furious films anymore. With that context, the fight scene where Dom and Hobbs team up together is really satisfying to watch. I really lament all of this backstage drama because it's just fun to watch them fight with each other. It's kind of like how it's fun to watch Dom and Brian drive, you know, in the sense of it's fun to watch the like the chemistry that they have in sort of the like looking through the passenger window to one another, right? It's the same thing, but like on the ground, boots on the ground, fist fighting sort of stuff between Hobbs and Dom. This might be the best like actual fight of the franchise, just because of that effect, you know, that Vin Diesel and The Rock are just really good. I don't know. They have a lot of chemistry.
Yeah, no, I mean one of the kind of underlying morality of the movie seems to be that like people with big muscles are good guys, and like that, you know, that seems to be very clear in this movie. More, you know, like, you know, it's okay to do police abuse of people that are bad, you know, that we don't like because they have less muscles than Hobbs, right? Like, that opening scene where like the guy's like, I have rights. He's like, no, you don't, not today, right? Just like throws. It's like it feels like it felt to me very much like, you know, the bigger the muscles, the better the guy, right? Like,
yeah.
Because like, you know, Shaw is a wiry guy, right? He's not like big in muscles. That means he's a bad guy, right? Like, But yeah, no.
Yeah.
I will.
And then there's also a couple of other fights in here that are great. I really love the tumble fight between Letty and Gia Carano, where like Letty like pulls out the handcuffs. There's just like a lot of fun stuff happening in that fight, and the stuff with Han Roman versus Han's doppelganger in the subway, where Han's doppelganger just like beats the shit out of them. It's really satisfying.
Yeah, I spent a little time last night trying to think through if the fight between Letty and Gina Carano actually makes any sense in terms of the plot, and it just stopped because I just can't. Like, it's
Why,
like,
well, why wouldn't it make sense in terms of the plot?
because Gina Carano's character is a double agent, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
like I said, I didn't finish this thought out because I was like, I don't care enough. Like, I'm not supposed to think
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this.
okay.
But like, there's definitely a thing to think through about like whether or not like they need to at least fight as hard as they did, right? Because like, if like, I don't think there's a good reason for Gina Carano to arrest Letty, right? Like to get her hands on Letty, because like she doesn't actually want anybody else to like because she's working with Shaw. Like, I don't want to think.
Yeah,
about
I
it.
mean, I think that reveal in and of itself is not great.
Yeah.
This is a reveal that comes at the very, very end of the movie, where I remembered this being the case, for some reason, but I think it's just because the doppelganger to Letty ended up being Gia Carano's character, and you had to have them sort of switch sides in tangent with one another. And also, you do have to explain. There are pieces of the plot that do get explained by the fact that she is next to Hobbs the entire time, right?
Yes.
We do know, we do know that, and we do sort of get there. But it's just like very at the last possible second, and doesn't really matter in the long run, because like if you think about it, the moment where he says you're gonna let me walk right out of here because I'm holding two people in the Canary Islands hostage, essentially, that moment just transitions right into this plane thing, and that's the end of the movie, right? Like that's where it all ends. They don't even escape the base. So
if I really cared, and again I don't, just like make her like do the heel turn by pulling the gun on the base director, right? Instead of having Hobbs do it, right? Like,
no, I would defend that. Hobbs has to do it because he's part of the family.
No,
right?
no. I think.
Okay.
Like from a pure logic standpoint,
sure.
Yeah, right. Like, because the point of her turning when she does isn't that she's a double agent. It's that he says, "Hey, babe, are you coming?" and she responds instead of Letty, right? Like that's the point, right? Like, again, regardless of the fact that like, I don't want to think about it too hard because I'm sure none of it makes sense, right? Like, I instinctually feel that like, why did she show the picture of Letty to Hobbs at the end of the last movie, right? Like, the last thing.
She didn't. Eva Mendes did. This is like one of you remember Eva Mendes from Too Fast, Too Furious? She is Hobbs's assistant at the end of Fast 5.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought that was the same character all the way through. That makes sense. Okay. Never mind then. Thank you.
So yeah, the like that whole reveal doesn't really do much or of anything for me, but it's kind of like, who cares? Like I think I wanted a little bit more from that, because I remember at the time thinking that they're going to become criminals again, right? And Hobbs is essentially going to join them as criminals, right? And the way that he's going to do that is he is going to side with them against sort of this NATO base, and they're all going to become outlaws again. But that doesn't really materialize either.
No, explicitly at the end of the movie, he's still a cop. He's still like an important cop. Hanging out.
And they're not criminals anymore, right? Like he's like, what number do you want? He says 1327, and then at this moment, just hit me where I live. It shows the Toretto house in Los Angeles, the Fast and Furious house, where they're having the family barbecues that Dom talked about in the last movie that we saw in the first movie, and that will go on to become staples of the franchise from here on out, right? The moment I actually forgot about this too, the running joke of where Roman where people make fun of Roman's forehead. There's a thing where in the barbecue, Roman says, "Uh-oh, somebody smells baby oil," and The Rock is walking up, and The Rock says, "Uh-oh, somebody," he says something about, like, watch out for your big ass forehead. And Ludacris does a spit take. That's real. That's authentic. Ludacris hadn't read the script for that scene, so he didn't know that was the line. And so when The Rock shoots that off, he actually spits out his drink, which I think is a great or maybe The Rock improvised it or something like that. It's just like, that's the stuff that warms my heart, right?
Buddy explained something to me.
Yeah.
They knew that Letty was alive at the end of 5. They knew definitely that Letty was a plot point in 6. Why did they have, like, Dom have a romance in the middle with this, like, poor woman who, like, they played it as well as they could, but they could have just, like, not had them be lovers, right? Like
Yeah, I appreciate that they did it that they didn't just forget about Elena, right? That she did show up and do some stuff, and she kind of gets a little bit of a send off or whatever. But yeah, I guess that like they could have planned around that probably a little bit better. My guess is that when Fast 5 was in production, they probably added this thing for Letty at the end of it, and they were like, we already have this whole thing, so we'll deal with it as they come. By the way, I was right the second time. It was an improvised line. It's like where Roman says, "You better hide your baby oil," and Hobbs says, "You better hide that big ass forehead." Eliciting a surprised laugh and spewing of beer from Tej. Dwayne's comment to Tyrese's character was totally unscripted. He didn't mention that he would be adding that line, so Ludacris's hilarious reaction was genuine. Tyrese stayed in character, and the director kept the line in the final cut. Thank you, Jesus, because what a good bit.
It's a callback too, right? Like, because Roman says, when looking at the crash cards, like, that could have been my forehead, and Tej says, "Your forehead," or nah, that's not as big as your forehead.
It's not as big as your forehead, yeah. Oh God. We're a little over halfway through. Do you understand why I became obsessed with these movies at this point? Like, are you in it? Are you submerged in the puddle of Fast and Furious?
So I won't say that I understand why you are as obsessed as you are, but I will say I understand why you chose to keep watching them. And like these movies are fun, right? Like, I will go see the next one in theaters. If we quit this podcast tomorrow, I would watch the rest of them and go see the next one in theaters.
Yes, that's all I wanted to hear. You know what? What more could you possibly ask for? Okay, I put a pin in something. I want to bring it back. Which is Brian and his doppelganger, which is the woman, right? Which is Shaw's sort of right hand woman. Can't remember her name. His name is like Venga or something. The Venga bus is coming. The tank scene is the best one. And I love the stuff that happens with the plane scene, even though everybody makes fun of the fact that the plane scene lasts for 20 minutes. So that plane is taking off for the equivalent of like 26 miles or whatever, right? Like, it just never runs out of runway.
That airstrip has to be like super fucking long. Yeah.
Listen, we're not going to think too much about the details of this stuff. But the very first car scene, which is the sort of Formula 1 racer with the ramp on the front, I think they're in Paris or in London.
That's the second car scene. The first car scene is a seaside race between Dom and Brian.
Okay, fine. I guess that counts.
It does. It was
yeah,
a race, and it opened on a race that I thought to myself, it's a fucking race. They have a race in this movie. Anyway, continue.
That's true. Yeah, they had two because they also
Yeah.
had Letty and Dom. So the scene where they're chasing Shaw out of his little hideout, and Shaw is in that form, the one scene with the ramp, and he's ramping all of the cars onto the other things. The thing that I forgot about is the Fast and Furious crew have some insane wipeouts in that scene, right? And the thing that will eventually happen to Brian is he's tracking the SUV, right, with the girl, because there's two of the racers. There's the one that she's in. There's the one that Shaw's in. Shaw breaks away. The Rock and Dom chase after Shaw. Brian is alone against her, and they do this thing which I think is just sweet, where he's tracking the SUV, and then the SUV swerves at the last minute, and you see that she is turned around and she's running right at him, and she scoops, she does the thing where she scoops under like his car. In the final scene, she gets back in that car and she's fucking with the people who are driving along the she's fucking with the people who are driving along on outside of the plane, right? Trying to stop them from stopping the plane. And as she does that, she ends up sort of 1v1ing with Brian again. And Brian realizes that there are these like metal or like concrete sort of blocks sort of off to one side. So he pulls in front of those and he goes right at her, but then swerves at the last second so that she crashes into it and flips a million times. And obviously
it's better than that. He spins around so that when she launches him, he lands back like flat, right? Like he doesn't swerve out of the way. He takes the ramp. I think it's like,
oh, you're right. Yes. Oh my God. Yes,
like,
you're right.
I was like, this is fucking stupid, but it's beautiful, right? Like,
yeah, the thing that I liked about that I didn't notice the first time was that he used the same trick to defeat her that she used to get him the first time. And stuff like that is just like, that's good action, right? Like that's good soup, okay?
oh, man, there's one thing that like that I actually like. This bothers me for real more than a lot of the other things in this movie, which is the car devices that like go nowhere. Like they launch the things at the car and it turns off the cars, and that point really goes nowhere except for like an excuse for them to buy more cars. And two, like the whole time was like when he was pulling the gun out, I was like, oh, that's a grenade launcher. How are they gonna dodge grenades? Then it wasn't grenades. And I was like, this feels like weird, like PG-13 magic or something, right? Like,
well, I think it's a setup for the moment where Brian drifts into the bollard and strips his off, but he doesn't like crash or whatever. Because I think that moment is cool.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
that is very, very cool. But like, it's also like, on its fit. Like more than most of the things like most of the other things in this movie are stupid, but like can variously be explained by like people being stupid, right? Which is much more excusable than like, I don't know. This felt like, I guess you could have chalked this up to people being stupid. It also felt like,
yeah, there's also a weird level of like intentionality. Like one of the details that I think is sort of dumb if you think about it too long is the paint, right? They go to Hobbs's base and it's been stripped clean, and she's like, there's nothing left, and Hobbs is like, there's always something, and he goes to the ground and he like scrapes up this paint and he gives that paint to Tej, and Tej says, oh hey, this is actually like military grade infrared low, like whatever paint that gets used at NATO bases, and we can cross-reference, like the use of that paint with the NATO bases that could have the chip, and that's how we know where Shaw is going. But if you actually think about it, it doesn't make sense, because why would Shaw have paint from a NATO base that he is intending to go to? Not that he has anything from, right? Like, but the answer to that is that Shaw wanted them to, it was intentional. Yeah. He doesn't go anywhere unless he wants you to go with, like, he doesn't tell you where he is unless he wants you to go there. And so, like, he left that paint behind on purpose or whatever. It's like, you can get away with a lot of dumb shit that way, just kind of by saying, like, oh, it was part of the villain's plan the whole time.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the thing I was going to ask, is how much of this is contingencies and how much of this is the base plan, right? Like if the base robbery could have gone off without a hitch, would he have done that? Or was he always planning on getting caught for the convoy part? I think the the last scene is a contingency. Where, like, I don't think he was planning the entire time on getting captured and then like revealing that he had Mia captured. But yeah, so like I think that's about right, like that he probably intended for them to find the paint, right? Again, minor detail, but they could have really, like, if this were a movie that was more based around the twist, maybe is the way to put this, right? The way you like sell the twist, and you're like, oh, right, you have that moment is you have Gina Carano's character find the paint and be like, oh, she found that because she was seeding that information, right? And then you have Hobbs like say the line about like a great ass and a great mind or whatever, right? Like, have it there, and like, you know, that kind of thing works out, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of this stuff is honestly just sort of pretty base level plot mechanics to get you from one point to another, right? Like you need them to be in a position to do car stuff. So obviously Shaw can't attack the base. They have to warn the base so that they put the chip on a convoy, and then Shaw attacks the convoy, right? Like that kind of a thing. You know, anyway, yeah. It almost sort of feels like you know, people used to shit on Aquaman for this reason. Which was like, what is he gonna do when there's no fish around, right? Like, what does Aquaman do in the middle of the desert, right? Like that kind of thing. That's sort of what the Fast and Furious crew is like, but with cars. Like, what do they do if they don't have access to cars? It's like their superpower.
Yeah, no, I mean, the answer is find a car, I guess. And
Yeah.
this is, so you know what this is actually like? This is Pokemon Pikachu used Thunderbolt. I think I've talked about this before, but like this is like way back in high school. One of my friends pointed out to me, it's like we were like flipping through the channels like you do when you're bored and in high school, and there's a Pokemon movie on, and so we just like kind of let it run while we're like doing something else. And my friend says to me, he's like, every problem in the Pokemon movies is solved by Pikachu using Thunderbolt, and damned if it wasn't that like the next scene was, we're hungry, we're starving, there is a hot dog machine without power, Pikachu used Thunderbolt, right? Like that's like, you know, car shaped hole, whenever you when you're a driver, every problem looks like a road, I guess, right? Like,
yes, yeah. When you are a street racer from Los Angeles, every problem does in fact look like a road, I guess. Okay, where do you think these things are going for here? But do you remember anything of your predictions from Fast 5? Did you have any predictions for Fast 6? Did we do a little segment like that?
I think we did, but I think I totally forgot them.
Yeah, I totally forgot them too. I cannot fucking remember a single detail. What are your predictions for Fast and Furious 7?
Oh, before we get there, something that I have to bring up because I sent this to you.
Okay.
Right? I thought at some point Letty was going to be like, yeah, I remember some stuff now. The fact that she doesn't remember anything still at the end of the movie and she's acting the way she is fucking insane. Right? Like, I don't know. It feels like they're like gaslighting her, right? Like if you can cut this movie to be like a weird horror movie, I think around like Letty, right? Because like she doesn't remember any of this, but like she's like falling into the, like, I don't know. That bothered me because it's revealed at the end of the movie that she still doesn't remember anything. She's just like kind of willing to go along with it, right? Like that's weird. That's really fucking weird, right? Like, and maybe I'll roll this into my predictions. She has to get her memory back because otherwise it will continue to be really fucking weird, right? Like,
man, does she get her memory? I think maybe they just don't talk about it, and she just behaves as though she has her memory back. I don't think it ever gets mentioned ever again, to be honest with you.
You know what?
I just think
that's fine, right? Like that's the only way you can play it, right? Is like either like you just pretend like that didn't happen, right? Like in terms of the movie plot, right? Like, or you make her explicitly get her memory. Either way, right? Like
something happened with your mic. I'm getting a very robot mic out of you.
I'm getting weird stuff on your side too.
Wonder what that's about.
You sound like you're on the moon.
I sound like I'm a robot?
You sound like you're talking through like a tin can to the moon.
Yeah, that's what you sound like to me. I guess that must be like a Discord. Hold on, I'm
Yeah,
gonna just
no,
like.
you've come back.
Oh,
Fine.
okay.
Am I sounding
Oh
okay?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You sound better, I guess. Wow, that was really weird.
Weird, yeah.
Yeah, I totally feel. I guess I do totally feel you. It really doesn't super matter because like there is stuff that requires Letty's like continuity knowledge, which I won't spoil any of that stuff. But it's just like you have to assume it works. You have to assume she got her memory back. I
Yeah.
think. I don't think
Right.
there's a way like where she could have not gotten her memory back by some of the next movies, just by the way that she like acts and behaves and remembers certain things. I could be wrong about that though.
Yeah.
Like I could always be wrong.
So what do I think is gonna happen next? Again, I know the stakes escalate. I will say that like, so Fast X is the one that's coming out, right?
Yeah. Okay. Fast X, Fast 10 is the one that's coming out. We have 3 more mainline movies: Furious 7, Fate of the Furious, F9,
and then Hobbs and Shaw.
and then Hobbs and Shaw, which is a spinoff, right?
I feel like Fast 7 is the one that I like absolutely have no knowledge of.
Okay.
Just because
Actually, you do because of memes, but I won't elaborate any further.
Okay. Um. I mean, I also know that this is the one that after which Paul Walker dies, right?
Yeah. So the meme of
The
them going separate ways, them looking at each other. Yeah, that's
yeah.
from the end of Furious 7 because Paul Walker is dead, unfortunately, and so Brian just sort of gets sunsetted as a character, and he gets this sort of happy ending with Mia and God, what's the kid's name? Jack?
Yeah, it's Jack.
Yeah, whatever. Him and the kid, right? And so that's something that happens in Furious 7. One other thing I didn't mention this, but I do want to say is again, Fast and Furious 6 has a deep connection to real stunts that I absolutely love and that work out great. Some of the stuff with the cars and the plane was obviously sort of like CGI towards the very end of the movie, but that tank was a real tank and it was really crushing cars on the highway. I'm pretty sure they shoot all this stuff in Puerto Rico. And also the F1 cars were real cars, flipping real cars, which I think that's part of the magic of the movies is the real kind of buck wild stunts that they go through. Honestly, the tank one I find very funny because you can drive the tank was like an army surplus tank that the army stripped all of the stuff out of. They basically give you, but like you put it's just like an engine and like it drives like a car essentially. There's no gun parts, right? So it still has a turret, it still has whatever, but you couldn't actually use it for any sort of warfare. And you can drive that tank. That tank is a tank in England, and you can go to a place in England. You pay them, and they'll let you drive around, and they take junk cars, and you can crush these junk cars or whatever. And like I think that stuff being real is a cornerstone of what makes Fast and Furious cool and great. Um Specifically because it's kind of the Star Wars thing, actually. I feel like when people talk about practical effects in Star Wars versus the CGI stuff, mostly what they're attacking is sort of the state of CGI in the prequels, right? And some of the sort of changes that got made in the special editions. I think all that stuff is typically not super great and does sort of look like people on green screens, but it's sort of a phantom of the time, since obviously those movies were coming around at the turn of the millennium when CGI was not as great as it is now. But I really do think watching a real tank crush real cars is different and better than watching a fake one do that. And I do wanted to that's the final piece of shout out that I had for Fast and Furious 6, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely buy that. There's just some parts of stuff that like, it's. I think I still think we're not at the apex of CGI technology, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, when we are more like part of it is just kind of like raw simulation power, right? Like, a car is not going to crush as realistically in a CGI model, at least not yet, right? I think we'll get there eventually, but I think you're ultimately right. I also think it's like hard just to act against fake things, right? Like real things are easier to act against. So, you know, yeah, I'll agree. Last kind of thing that I think I want to shout out is, just that last scene where they're all just like waiting for Dom to like walk, like he drives the car out of the front of the fucking plane, and then he just like walks out of the fire. It's like again, incredibly stupid, but incredibly sincere. Fucking A plus.
Yeah, driving a car out of an exploding, whatever those are, those C-17 planes, like those
It's a cargo
gigantic
plane.
planes.
Yeah.
Um, it's satisfying. It is a satisfying movie going moment, I guess. So yeah, I guess I gave out my ranking. We talked about that in the beginning. I guess I'm good. We can talk about our weeks.
Yeah. So buddy, how was your week?
God, how was my week? What have I been doing? I have been playing a lot of WoW because we're getting up a crew 2. This is something that happens kind of midway through any sort of season, right? Where we're pretty high end. We cleared our first 20, which all right, this is actually kind of an interesting topic that I wanted to bring up a little. So one of the things that is new about Dragonflight is that the mythic spell effect appearances on armor are now tied to an achievement, right? Which is effectively ahead of the curve, but for mythic level stuff, right? So typically there's sort of 3 levels. You have normal, heroic, mythic, in terms of raid difficulty, we would say. And the version of that for Mythic Plus is called Keystone Hero, which is getting a rating of 2400, which is kind of like 18s ish. If you get all the way up to 20s, you time 20s, you get portals to those dungeons, which I think is a really neat thing. It's like the portals are great because it is the perfect like capstone that you want to go for, like thing to achieve, but that matters not at all, right? It is entirely superfluous, essentially, to the way that this works, and especially because we know they're recycling dungeons from previous expansions now. Any portals we do have are not necessarily like are portals that are going to work indefinitely into the future, right? So for instance, if I miss my Court of Stars portal now, I might get that portal when it rotates back in a couple of seasons, right? Like that kind of a thing. But the mythic spell effects. So you know how all of the armor sets are different, and when you go back to an old raid and you like farm that for transmog, you can farm it on mythic and you can get the mythic armor set, which is a little bit different. Typically it has some extra sort of like spell effects, or maybe the model is a little bit extra, a little bit different. And instead what they have done is they have tied that appearance of the extra spell effects to the achievement, right? So because I got Keystone Hero Season 1 of Dragonflight, all of the Vault of the Incarnate items, I can sort of apply these lightning bolt, thunderous spell effects to the armor to like make it like look cool and interesting. And I was wondering what you thought about that, because technically it is a change in philosophy from, oh well, when the expansion is old enough, you just go and farm it on your own for transmog and you get the same appearance. Now, if you want that special mythic appearance, you have to do a mythic level achievement, whether that's killing Mythic Razageth, getting Keystone Hero, getting Gladiator in PvP, what have you.
Yeah, so I feel like that's fine, right? Like what is it? Like PvP has always had like the kind of seasonal mounts that are like locked to the seasons, right? Which is something that I'm working on right now myself.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's nice because it's not kind of like it's not like a ratings based thing. It's like, win a certain number of matches, right? Like I'm like 50% the way through it. Even though I haven't broken a challenger yet, just because solo shuffle is a mixed bag. I got my first 6-win solo shuffle this week, actually.
Oh my god,
nice.
where you won every single match?
Yeah. Which
That's
is
amazing.
Yeah. I think I just got lucky because I also was on top of my game. I'll talk about that in a little while, just because there's a neat thing there. But I think that's like a perfectly fine thing. Like I think like effects, titles. I even think you could go as far as like an appearance that's like locked to a specific achievement is fair game, right? Like, obviously, I don't know. The only thing that gives me a little bit of pause is that it's like it's time gated in a way that like can't ever rotate back in, right? Like that feels a little bit tough, but like it doesn't bother me that much. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I
yep,
would
sure.
maybe like I would I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to say, oh, like maybe you should be able to access a spell effect through like one of 3 ways, right? Like, like you do you either Mythic Raid, Gladiator, PvP, or Keystone Hero gets you a key to like get one of these special things. But I think there's also value in having them separated out. It just kind of, I think it kind of like, you like collecting mounts, right? Like the fact that like one of those mounts is locked behind PvP, which is a thing that I don't think you do much of, right?
Nope.
Like, if you were going to be like super completionist about it, that would suck. It would be nice if you had if there was an ability to do it through something you do enjoy doing. But I think that's like ultimately a minor concern. So I think it's fair. Do you have thoughts on it?
Well, I have thoughts on it. No, I think this is a good version of things. So one of the things that I think is complex about this in general is that you can pursue multiple paths in WoW at a single time, right? So I can go for Mythic Plus at the same time I go for Raid, at the same time I go for PvP, right? All 3 of those can have um sort of like achievements and stuff like linked to them to kind of like make them unique. But there's an interesting like thing of equivocating certain bits of them, right? So for instance, the weird one when it comes to like raids and Mythic Plus is that raids used to give different eye level gear than Mythic Plus, such that it was sort of more efficient to be farming plus 15s in Shadowlands times, because that was what would get you high end raid gear rather than doing plus rather than doing mythic raid content, right? So I would say it is harder to do mythic raids than it is to get Keystone Master in Shadowlands. And the way that they kind of changed that is that they said have Keystones give you stuff all the way up to 20 rather than capping at 15. So now 20 is the new sort of like cap that we're bouncing around, and Keystone Master is more equivocated to or is more equivalent to ahead of the curve rather than being equivalent to essentially cutting edge, right? But I think that's a really complicated thing. So for instance, I got ahead of the curve this weekend. So I killed heroic Razagath. It's kind of, I don't think that fight is in range of anyone who just does heroic raids. You have to do other stuff, in my opinion. When we killed Razagath, I did really well in that fight. I was number 1 or number 2 on the poll. I was number 2 on the poll. So Arms Warrior is particularly good. It was my friend Devin who got a legendary parse on that, and then it was me, just underneath. I got an 82. But I'm just like looking at the item levels of the people who are in this raid, right? So me and Devin are both 416. My friend Reese is 416. My friend Zach is 417. Soren is 416. Patrick is 417. So that's of our, top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 DPS. Most of these people are people who are not wearing a single piece of heroic gear, right? Because in order to be 416, you have to be above and beyond heroic, right? Because heroic caps out at 411. Stuff that drops off of Razagath and Broodkeeper is 411 gear, right? and then there's a couple of other people who are up there who are, you know, pulling their weight, but are, you know, kind of in more reasonable, right? So for instance, my friend Noel, he's at 411, 404, 403, 409, 411, 409, right? Like kind of all the way down. But it's just like, it seems kind of crazy to me that half of your DPS core have to outgear the content by 10 item levels or more, really, in order to clear the boss. Because like that boss was not easy, and like the damage and healing checks are not easy. And so it sort of feels insane to me. I guess I sort of like wonder, like, how the fuck is Wombo gonna get this? Because most of Wombo are people who only raid, right? Like people who only
Like
raid,
me,
and it just sort of feels
my level right now is 399, right? Like I'm like
yeah,
I just haven't put any effort into mythics, right? So like, you know,
yeah.
right? Like, yeah, no, that's fair, right? And like people in Wombo don't parse at like 80s, right? Like
Mhm.
even you and me who are like, you know, I don't think I'm like any sort of wonderkin, but like we like put the effort, like I put the effort in to do well, you put the effort in on Kruva to do well, right? We're not parsing particularly high in those fights.
Yep.
I don't know what's up with that, but like, you know, you know, and like we're the top of our guild chart, right? Like no one is like, I don't know if we're gonna be able to down heroic Razageth. Yeah, like, you know,
Like maybe she's just gonna get really fucking nerfed. Which would be something, right? If Razageth got just kind of like, you know, chunked by 10%, which has happened in previous stuff. So Sepulchre of the First Ones is famously like the hardest raid they've ever made. Um, and there were an insane number of nerfs to get all the way down, you know, and but we got ahead of the curve eventually there. The question that I sort of have though, and that I think might be interesting, is what's coming in 10.0.7, right? So 10.0.5 was sort of like this mid-systems level patch, came out a couple of weeks ago, right? Came out 6 weeks after the launch of the expansion. Seems pretty normal. Then they added a new patch, which is a minor content patch, which seems new. 10.0.7 adds a new special ring that has like special gem slots in it, and those gem slots seems to have pretty powerful effects, right? And people have compared
is
this to borrowed
I
power.
was
They
gonna
say
say, is
that,
this the
oh,
borrowed power thing?
yeah, and people have complained about it on that level. They're like, "Oh, this is just going to be borrowed power. You're going to have to farm this content in order to like get the good ring, yada yada yada." But I actually think what it might be is catch-up gear, essentially, right? It is, instead of nerfing the boss fight, we're going to give you this really powerful ring, and if you farm out this ring, you're going to increase your DPS by 10 or 15%. Or whatever the number will end up being, right? And that's enough to sort of get a raid like Wombo off the ground, when it sort of like comes to this level of achievement. But yeah, it's really interesting because I don't know what is correct, right? Is it correct to essentially make heroic Razageth something, I don't want to say trivial, but if we're using Wombo as sort of a baseline, because Wombo is really, I think Wombo is actually pretty good litmus test for this, since most people don't really touch other content and they're getting almost all of their gear from raid itself, right? Um, do you design Razageth for that group of people who are not walking in and outgearing the content, right? Who are putting out numbers at this sort of like level, and making damage checks at this sort of level, right? Or do you make it for sort of like the Patrick's Guild version, which is between raid nights, we're running a lot of mythics. People are running 15, 16, 17s all the way up to 20s, right? Frankly, they hit 20s before I did, just which is a minor thing because, you know, the healer to my regular mythics crew had some health issues and wasn't playing the game for a month essentially. But it's just like, you know, when you have a group of people who are pushing really high end content in sort of one avenue and then translating those gains to another avenue, I don't know that I have a good answer for the way that the encounter team should sort of balance those fights, right? Um, because maybe it is reasonable to say, yeah, we expect people to do a certain level of Mythic Plus in order to get ahead of the curve. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I
I don't
mean,
know.
my kind of thought is that I feel like you should be able to clear raid off of raid, right? Like up to heroic, right? Like I think that's a reasonable ask for like mythic, right? But I think heroic you should be able to clear off of raid. Maybe that takes a little bit longer because you have to like it's harder to gear people up solely on raid. I think that's a little bit easier to justify if you can also gear up off of open world content, right? Like I know that's the thing that they talked about. Like, and this sounds like if this ring I think is implemented right, it would be like open world type solution, right? Like that you can like kind of go do solo content and like get yourself to like a reasonable position. I think that's it. I think that's a reasonable ask, but I don't know. I just feel like raids. I think I pretty strongly feel that like heroic raid should be solvable with heroic raid level gear. And yeah, I think I feel pretty strongly about that. Yeah. I don't know how you solve that otherwise. Like, is the expectation that you have enough like crafted gear to get there? Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, but even then, crafted gear you can't make tier out of. This is a problem that I sort of have in a weird way. I was hoping that I would be able to make tier out of my crafted gear, but that didn't end up materializing in a way that I felt was super satisfying. I don't know. One of the things that they had talked about was instead of having a catalyst system that you could get tier crafted for you, and I think I do prefer that overall, which is maybe just because like I'm a professions oriented player who likes doing, one of the success stories of Dragonflight for me has been getting on my like 8 different alts and flying around the world for 30 minutes farming herbs or whatever until you get all of the drops for the week, right? Because every gathering profession you can gather 6. It's like, for mining it's like the Iridius mine or like the Iridius ore or something like that, which increases
fragments, and then like the iridescent ore is by 3 points as the capstone.
Yeah. And so you just keep mining nodes, which are, it doesn't take that long. It only takes me like half hour, 45 minutes. But I do that across a bunch of different characters now, right? Because I have somebody in each of the professions, and it's just pretty easy and effortless to keep up with all of them.
I think that's probably like why you can't craft tier gear, which is because like someone like you will like make 7 alts and like be able to craft all of their tier gear.
I mean, that's true, right? But like, I feel like that's like I feel like that's a better system than just saying, here's the thing that gives you. I feel like if tier came out of crafting, it would be a more engaging system because it would engage more of your player base, right? If instead of the catalyst being the catalyst, you submitted a work order and you asked somebody, hey, turn this into tier, essentially. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being selfish because I am a crafted player and I like want more reason to do crafted gear sort of things.
I think the right answer there is probably like you can use catalyst charges on crafted gear. I think that solves most of the problem. Because then you have a reason to like order a special crafted thing, but you also can like use your charges on it, right? Like, and you don't like make it like I think that's that, or like maybe a timer on like crafted gear. No, because then you can't put that on the client side, right? Like I think the big issue is that like they don't want somebody running 7 alts and getting themselves fully kitted out in top tier gear on their own. Although maybe the reagents that like you have to be 10 heroic bosses to get the reagents to actually craft a heroic piece of gear. Maybe that's enough of a limit, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, outside of WoW, actually, so I said I have a thing to talk about with regards to my performance in PvP. I got a new piece of hardware actually last week, but can you see that? Hold on. So this is going terribly. I apologize. This is an Azeron handpad. So this is you guys are seeing this mirrored, but this is my right hand because I'm left-handed, and this is like essentially my offhand. My left hand goes on the mouse. So this is a thing I've been getting used to. So it's a new thing that friend of the cast Monic recommended to me. It's highly ergonomic. And part of it for me is that because I'm left-handed, I usually have my fingers on the numpad, and so this is just more comfortable, makes more sense. So I've been trying to learn that this week, which is why my performance has been down in WoW, because I after a lifetime of pressing the numpad, I have to learn how to use these. So
That is incredible. That is a really incredible thing. Wow.
yeah, so it is a custom, like they 3D print these individually. It's in like, I think it's in Latvia. They are not cheap, but like I am a hardcore gamer, right? Like I'm a core gamer, and I don't have a lot else to spend my disposable income on. And
Did they like print your hand? Is it made for your hand specifically?
It is not that complex, right? There's a bunch of customization options, but like it is primarily that Lou says it's the nerdiest thing I've ever seen. It is, right? It's called the Azron Cyborg, if people want to look. They came out with a new smaller model recently. And it is like, just because like the way I play, like the thing that like hurts, like the reason I feel like I want this the most is just because of the way that, like, I use the arrow keys in the numpad, and like my hands always like always stretches, and so this kind of puts everything like actually in my hand in a way that's like not terrible. Again, they're expensive. I think they're about the cost of they're like $200 or $300 a pop. I have to pay a little bit more for the Southpaw version, but it's a cool tool. And so
Sure, true, I guess. Yeah.
it was also like a 7-week fucking lead time. Like I ordered this around like New Year's, and it just came last week. Because they it's like a bespoke little thing. So it's a cool little thing though, and it works well. So, yeah. But otherwise, I will have more to talk about that. Hopefully, as it comes on, as I use it more, to see how much I really like it. But otherwise, I finished God of War Ragnarok finally. What did I beat the game. I beat the bosses, or the post-game bosses as well. I haven't finished the Muspelheim Crucible challenges, but I've done most of the game. I will say it's a really fun game. It's weird in that, like, if you do all the Berserker challenges, the end game content becomes kind of super easy. Like the hardest boss in the game is definitely the post game bosses, and like some of the Odin is the final boss. This is not like a big spoiler, but like a couple of the Berserker Kings are much harder than Odin. But it's a good game with a neat story, very deep emotional story. Some wild twists that I won't spoil here for the sake of the audience, but I would highly recommend God of War Ragnarok. Great fucking game. The other thing to talk about maybe is that I have started thinking a little bit more deeply about my Marvel Snap decks. You saw a little bit into this in our Twitter chat.
Yeah. The group chat.
Yeah, because Zhao's playing Snap now apparently. But just kind of like, it's interesting because you have, it's like, feels like it's like less consistent than a traditional game deck, because like it's like, in some ways it's more consistent because it's like more consistent than like a singleton deck in Hearthstone, but it's like less consistent than like what I would call like a standard deck, just because you can't really guarantee your ability to pill any card. So you need either a couple different win conditions or a couple different ways to achieve the same win condition, right? Like, my destroy deck, right, is built around either what is it, like Carnage or Venom, and a couple other cards that like Death. Basically I have a handful of cards that benefit from being destroyed, or cause benefits when they are destroyed. A couple cards that gain benefits, or excuse me, that gain benefits from destroying other things. one card that's just so like Deathlock is a 3/5, which is a good stat allocation, 3 energy, 5 power. And he destroys everything else in the space. He doesn't get a benefit from it, but it can activate some of the abilities. And then like a couple of like killer cards like Death is a 9/12, but costs 1 less for every creature destroyed in the game, or every card destroyed in the game. And the other one is like, forget his name, but he's a 6/0 that destroys a creature and then copies it to other places. So like that's very much kind of like a multiple ways to do the same thing deck. My other deck that I've been playing a lot of, I call it the nonsense deck because it's just kind of based on like being weird and like tempo-y, I guess is the best way to put it. It's based around kind of like cheating out high value characters, which is either through like this character Infinite. The Infinite, do you know what this hero is, by the way? I've been meaning to look him up just because I have not heard of him outside of this.
No, I have never heard of Infinite.
He's a 6/20, by far the most powerful base power character in the game, but you can't play him if you've played anything on the previous turns. You have to give up your 5 turn to play him, which is like basically untenable in most situations, right? There's a couple situations where it works out. One of them being that like there's a character Sunspot where unspent energy get powers him up so you can make it kind of work there. More commonly, I use Dazzler pulls a card out of your deck and plays it. Or Dracula discards a card from your hand at the end of the game and takes his power. So that's usually how I end up like trying to cheat him out. But you know, that's like the win condition there is Dazzler pulling things out. What's it called? Dracula getting a good pull off of something. She-Hulk is a 6/10 that costs 1 less for every unspent energy the previous turn. So like I can sometimes get her out on like turn 4 if I don't have anything better to play. A bunch of little different ways to kind of like get yourself to a point, and that feels like it kind of works like more tempo-y decks. If you've got like a specific mechanic that you're using, I feel like it doesn't quite like you kind of have to go with multiple ways to do the same thing type of strategy as opposed to like multiple strategies to win multiple win cons. But it's been interesting going through it. I'm not like great at the game. Like I haven't even like I don't know. I've gotten into the low 40s, which is like, you know, Infinite is 100. So, but I'm also not playing tons and tons of games. But it's an interesting game to kind of screw around with. I have gotten a little bit more resentful of the leveling system because like past like your like the first like 400 or so levels, you get like all the cards in kind of like the base collection. Past that, you get basically alternating these collector's boxes, which might contain a card, might contain gold or credits, might contain collector's tokens, and tokens are how you can buy cards out of the rotating store. But then like the other ones are like boosters, like they're mostly just things that let you level up more, right? Like some of them are like 50 credits, and 50 credits are just ways to buy more levels. Some of them are boosters, and boosters are just like ways to get more levels. And so it feels like it's built to obfuscate the fact that like you're really only getting a reward every like and like that's also like they also split out the rewards. You start out getting them like every level, then every other level. Now it's like every 4 levels you get a reward. And so it's like really like every 8 to 12 levels you get a substantial reward. And even half time is a little bit ungenerous, but like a lot of the time it's still not a lot of reward there. So it's not great. Not my favorite.
Okay, that's interesting. Brian Kibler said something a little bit similar on his stream when he was talking about Marvel Snap, because like a lot of Hearthstone streamers, he was playing Snap on stream for a while, and folks were they just asked him, they were like, hey, are you still playing Marvel Snap? What's up with that? And he said that he doesn't like Marvel Snap's sort of unlock system, right? For like leveling up, and how the new cards get drip fed into the game. So I don't quite understand the series thing, but it's like Series 4, Series 5 cards or whatever come out every once in a while or whatever. And he said it is enough to frustrate me because I feel like I have to learn new things, but not enough to actually upset or change sort of like the meta or the way that I'm approaching the game at all. And those two things just make for a very like friction aggravating kind of experience. Like, you know, the contrast that he's drawing is obviously to Hearthstone, which just drops buckets of new cards, right? You know, in April we're going to get a new expansion. It's going to rotate out 3 sets of cards, you know, 3 whole sets obviously. And it is also going to bring in 135, more than that, 144 new cards. With, you know, with a new core set also with it, right? Like the core set is going to change because we're going from the year of the Kraken to the year of whatever the next year is, like all of this kind of stuff. And he's like, this really upsets the meta, right? And it's fun because you can discover new things. You can change, you know, how what is good, what is bad, what's your approach to, you know, to sort of matchups and all of that sort of thing. And then you have time for a meta to sort of congeal and to play around with it in fun and interesting ways. Maybe the meta is really aggressive, so you can tech out your control deck to win in this environment in this way, right? That kind of thing. And he was just talking about how Marvel Snap doesn't really have that luxury, or doesn't work that way, because of the way that the cards just kind of get dripped in, and it's like 1 or 2 cards aren't really going to change anything, even though I have to learn them because my opponents are playing them, but it's also hard to get them because the way the monetization is. So I don't know, I have no horse in that race obviously because I still have yet to try Marvel Snap. I keep meaning to, but then also don't do it. So
Yep. No, I mean that's totally fine. It is like my kind of like break time game, and I appreciate it for that. Like it hasn't gotten stale yet, which is the big thing. There is a lot of variation game to game because of the randomized locations, and because of your opponents. Sometimes that feels unfair. Like I have had like one of the locations is Ego the Living Planet. You know what Ego the Living Planet does?
No.
When that location gets revealed, the game basically plays itself. Ego takes controls of both players and plays their cards for them. And that is like I've only seen it once because it is like horrifically frustrating. There is also a card, it's Agatha Harkness, that will basically play your cards for you, which is interesting, but like also doesn't play particularly well. But that's like you opt into that. The only time that has ever aggravated me is I used a card that steals the highest value card in your opponent's hand. And Agatha Harkness always starts in your hand if you have her in your deck. So I stole it out of her hand, or I stole her into my own hand, and she played my game for me and lost. So you know,
yeah, that's interesting. There is some stuff like that in Hearthstone, but it's like Zephyrus is a good example of this. Zephyrus being a card that reads the board state and recommend, and it's like discover a card, right? But like discover the perfect card. So it reads the board state and it understands, oh, what do you need? What might you be looking for, right? So sometimes it will find interesting lethal for you, right? So for instance, if you have a big guy on board and he can attack, you could discover Wind Fury to give him Wind Fury so he can attack twice for lethal, that kind of thing. But then there's also just like, you know, is there a strong opponent, you know, is there a strong minion from your opponent on the board? If so, he's going to like recommend you something to kill it. Or he might recommend something that allows you to copy it. Or he might recommend mind control so that you can take control of it next turn. Like all of those kinds of things, right? Which I feel like is fun ways to use the computer to do that thing. But having the computer play your turn seems a little crazy to me.
yeah. The only time it really aggravates me is and then like I said that he only showed up once in one of my games. That's because like the best thing you could say about it is it's fair because it takes control of both players' decks, but like the one that I've seen more frequently that really aggravates me is like draw 3 cards, destroy both. It's draw 3 cards and replace both decks with random cards. It's like, oh well, whatever the fuck I was going for is just like totally out the fucking window now, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like retreating in the snap mechanic is really important for this game, right? Like to kind of keep it interesting because it's like, oh, I need to leave now, right before I end up losing a bunch of points in stupid ways. So, yeah, yep. But I'm still having fun with it.
Sounds good. You also watched Margin Call, right?
No, that was Zach, not me.
Oh, that was Zach. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Okay, yeah, no, that's it. That's all.
What did I watch? Did I watch anything interesting this week? I watched a couple episodes of Kunk on Earth, which is kind of like a parody. Like it says it's produced by the BBC. I think it is. It's on Netflix. It's like a parody of
Oh,
it's a comedic actress being like, and in around Zero BC or Zero AD, an almost Christ-like figure arose. His name was Jesus Christ. Like joke. Like I'm not doing it great, but it's funny.
No, I have seen clips of this. I didn't know that they were from a show, to be honest. I just thought they were funny TikTok clips. Like there's one where she is talking about the Last Supper, and it's like, in this 4th century painting of the Last Supper, you can see, it's all, Jesus is twice the size of everyone, so it looks like he's having dinner with school children. And when Leonardo da Vinci rebooted the painting in the 1600s, he properly proportioned everyone, and it feels like you are going to betray Jesus Christ the next day for 30 silver yourself or something like that, right? Like some bit. I thought that was pretty funny. Is that where is that? Is that like a Netflix thing?
It's a Netflix thing. My girlfriend introduced me to it. It is not my favorite, but it's like okay, light watching. But it's like I said, it's good light watching. I would, if you like the actress that does it, I'd say go for it. It wasn't quite my thing, but I understand why people have been enjoying it. And I think the second episode was better than the first, so maybe I'll keep watching it and see if it gets better.
Sure.
Anything else? I don't know. I've been playing Lancer with some friends, friends of the cast. Lancer being the book here. It's a TTRPG where you're a mech pilot.
Yep.
Here's the book. It's a fun game. I pilot a mech. That has a harpoon. The pilot's name is Ralph. You know how it goes. But it's an interesting system. It's got like a lot, like something that I think this game does that a lot of games that aren't D&D or Pathfinder don't do is it's got like a deep mechanical system. Like I find that like a lot of like indie TTRPGs tend to be very fluffy and very light on the crunch, which is fine. Like nothing against those games, but like if you like people who like crunch, Lancer's a pretty good game for it. Especially the guy. So friend of the cast, Nick, is running the game, and he just kind of like doesn't really engage with a lot of the fluffy parts of it. And just kind of like, and now we're gonna go to a mech fight. It's like, yay, mech fights! So like the fluffy parts of the system are very fluffy. It's like play out a scene, see how it goes, and more often than not, it's like we talk for like 30 seconds, and then we roll a die, and it's like, okay, that part's over. Now we can do the mech fights. But still, it's a great little system, and I'd recommend it. Yeah. You have anything else, buddy? Like, what have you been up to this week? Otherwise, you talked about WoW a bunch.
I have been trying to get back into. Hey, have you ever had the issue of you played a game a bunch, you liked it, you want to get back into it, and it's hard to?
Yeah, I've felt that before.
I have been trying to do that with Pathfinder Kingmaker. I really want to finish Pathfinder Kingmaker. I don't think I'm all that close, unfortunately. But I guess I honestly think the problem is I'm too good at D&D for this game to work well for me. Which is to say that just like it is tactically correct to like pre-buff yourself with haste, because I like the contours of playing against a computer is different than the contours of playing against a GM, right? And so walking into every scene, or like walking into every situation and seeing, oh, there's a bunch of Cyclops zombies in the next room, buff, 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 then walk in, start combat, so I'm not spending rounds of combat on casting buff spells, and then just like annihilating these guys. It's just like, it trivializes the content, but it's really hard for me not to engage in, because like, yeah, buff spells are kind of the most satisfying spells to cast. And also just because of the way that prepared spells work, it is hard not to do them. Anyway, so, you know.
I have heard that like the later fights in that game like kind of require some of that, at least on the harder difficulties. I don't know. I just like I love Pathfinder, and that's part of why I have no desire to play these games. It's like I think like my hot take is that TTRPG combat is not a great combat engine, and it is fulfilled by the fact that it's part of a TTRPG that has the non-combat stuff. It's like built to be played with dice and paper, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think that it's built to be played with dice and paper, and that's what makes it good. And so kind of computerizing it. But there is something to this sort of fantasy of being able to play a game of D&D where I am all of the PCs and there's no inter-party squabbling. There's no someone is looking at their phone and not paying attention, so they don't know to be the one to make the charisma check because they're playing the bard, and so fine, the fucking sorcerer's gonna do it even though he's not as good as the you like, just like being able to just have total control over the party and doing the things that you want to do with them and making the choices that you know are the best, even if they are, you know, like have their own sort of like egos that you have to sort of like deal with. There is something like immensely satisfying about that. Plus, I just think that like the general loop of here's a dungeon, you know, go into it, abiding by some of these sorts of rules is like pretty good. I actually think that this does the best version of things like random encounters, or you know, traveling through sort of the overworld map, which are sort of these like tabletop fantasies that I have that really don't work. And part of what makes playing as the computer great is they just work instantly for you, right? Because like the computer just offloads so much of that overhead, and combat does not take 45 minutes, it takes 5. So I kind of don't really care. Yeah, sure, I'll take a random encounter. Fuck yeah, that's like experience in items, like absolutely, right? The only reason I wouldn't take a random encounter is if I'm afraid about, right, like if I'm running my guys up to a dungeon that I know is going to be a hard dungeon, I don't want to waste my resources, sure, I'll skip these random encounters or whatever. And so it's like, it's just kind of neat to engage with some of that stuff on that kind of level. So anyway, I don't have it. That's just, I've been trying to get back into it and have been having a harder time with it, which is unfortunate, but you know, this is the world we live in. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Makes sense. All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we're good. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you'd like to reach us and tell us any of the things that we, or talk to us about any of the things we talked about on this podcast, reach us at nerdsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@nerdsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/somenerdsplaygames or youtube.com/@somenerdsplaygames, where these go out live. Rate, review us on iTunes, wherever you find podcasts. We've got a bunch of links to social accounts down in the description. But do you have anything else you're looking to promote?
I have nothing else that I'm looking to promote.
Well, in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.